Hi everybody, this is Christi
and Emily
from Pie-Eyed Love, and we are here to show you our very first video. We decided that it made sense to start with our crust recipes. We each do something a little bit different, and we're going to start with mine. Are you excited?
I'm very excited.
Okay, I'm excited too. So my crust is very simple, all butter crust. So it's flour, salt, butter, and water, and that's it. I don't sweeten it at all. I don't like anything sweet, and that's about it. So I think we'll get started.
This is exciting for me because I don't do all butter, and I want to see how the magic happens on this because I'm still not convinced you can do it. Or I can do it at least.
And we'll try. So here we go. We'll see how it turns out.
I know your pie is delicious.
So we're going to start with flour, and I'm going to make a double crust. So I'm going to make enough to either make 2 pies with a crumble top or 1 pie that has a crust on top, which I think is probably what I'm going to end up using it for today, but you never really know when you get started. So I use, for my flour, I use King Arthur's unbleached all-purpose flour. But whatever you use, I'm sure will be fine. And I didn't bring a knife.
Do you want some help?
You know what I'm going to need? Will you hold this for me for a second? Because I forgot to bring a knife. Oh, you know what? I'll just use my butter knife. Yeah, scoop for me. Why don't you scoop?
I need a job to do. I can't just stand here and watch
Yep. And so you don't want your flour to be packed too tightly. You want to get the measuring right. I don't weigh anything, but I do scoop into the measuring cup and then take a knife to, yep, I'll let you use
this. Just trusting me.
Yep, look at, she's going to measure my flour. I'm not anxious at all about it. Yeah. So that's 1 cup. We need 2 1/2.
I'm going to keep on going with that. Can you hold my knife?
Oh, yeah, sure.
I have never scooped flour with a giant butcher knife. So
I haven't either, actually.
What I appreciate about how
and I would have used the dull edge. It was making me a little nervous that she's about to cut herself, but that's okay.
Listen, I do not have knife skills. Let's just put that out there.
Right, I'm the cook in the group.
Check it. I'm going to change now. No, I got nothing.
That makes me better.
Oh,
yeah, I do. I like that. That seems safer. Okay, and then I've got a half for you. Yeah, look at you, all self-sufficient.
Christy keeps her flour in this beautiful little flour thing. What are they called?
It's a canister. I think they call it a canister.
I keep mine in the bag, and this makes it so much nicer. I don't know why I can't just make that leap and buy one.
Yeah.
I just can't.
I've always had a canister, but this one's pretty recent. It was like a trip to TJ Maxx Home Goods or something, and they were so pretty, and I thought, why not? Okay, so we have 2 1/2 cups of flour in the food processor. Yes, I use a food processor, and actually this is something that Emily and I both do that's the same. We both use a food processor. My mom used to use 2 forks and do it all by hand, and that seems really great, and I use a food processor. So I do put the dough blade in here. I don't know that it matters all that much. I've made it with the regular S blade, but I use the dough blade. My Cuisinart has a dough button that I use. I don't actually know what it does, but when I remember to use it, I use it. So I have 2 1/2 cups of flour, and then this would be like a teaspoon of salt, I think, technically. Whatever you see in the recipe that's written is what it should be, but I always just use my hand. So I'm going to use what I put in for 2 pies. That's what I put in. And then next comes the butter, and the butter's in the fridge.
You don't do sugar in yours?
No sugar. I don't. So, I also do a lot of 2 crust pies, and Emily does a lot of crumble top pies. And for me, I don't like to add any extra sweetness to the filling.
No, I feel you.
I don't like anything especially sweet, and I don't like anything especially rich. So it's just flour, salt, sugar. I'm sorry, flour, salt, water, and butter. So I'm gonna grab my butter. I try to use the butter as quickly as after it came out of the fridge as possible. On an especially hot and humid day, like today, it's about 80% humidity in here right now. I would sometimes cut it into small chunks and then throw it back in the freezer. I'm not gonna do it just for the purposes of this video, but you definitely want your butter to be nice and cold so that the chunks sort of stay differentiated within the dough. You don't want them to be completely blended in with the flour because they add flakiness, the little air pockets that they form in your finished crust. So I'm just cutting these into, 1/4 to 1/2 inch small chunks. You don't have to be precise at all about this. And this is unsalted butter. You want to be able to control the salt content. You could see how precise I was about my salt content there a little bit ago. So you don't want to use salted butter. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the second stick of butter. I used to use a combination of shortening and butter together. And I used that for years and years, and the crust was flaky and wonderful. And then I read some article about how humans can't digest shortening.
I haven't read that article yet.
Sorry, I'm not going to send it your way either. It was kind of a shame to read it. And so then I started playing around with all butter crusts, and it took me a while to get it right. And I don't even know that I messed with the recipe all that much over time, but it just took some practice because the dough is different. It's a little bit harder to work with than with the shortening. And you miss out on a little bit of flakiness. It's not as flaky as when you use shortening, but the flavor's great because it's all butter. So I switched to all butter at some point. I'm trying to remember my mom's pie might have been all shortening when she made pie dough when I was growing up with her 2 forks. Okay, so I'm going to. That's a good question. Didn't make it quite over here, did it? So here I'm going to just pulse the flour, salt, and butter together. Sometimes I combine the flour and salt before I put the butter in. I guess then you're gonna have better salt distribution, and sometimes I don't. I really don't do this the same way every time. I follow the same general rules, but I am in no way a perfectionist.
This is why she's my pie maid, right?
Yeah, this makes us a match made in heaven. All right, so I'm gonna push the dough button this time. Because I saw it and noticed it, and I'm just gonna pulse.
I've never seen a dough button.
Yep, mine has a dough button. And so I just pulse it until, they say like pea-sized crumbs. I mean, that's sort of like when you read a recipe what it says. I don't know what that really means because it's so irregular when you actually use the food processor that I just do it until I like the way it looks. And that's good.
Looks lovely.
So if you can see what's going on in there, I'm just gonna knock it off the edges. You don't always do this with a super sharp chef's knife. Usually a butter knife will do, but since this is what's right next to me, it's what I'm gonna use. And that looks great. Nice butter distribution in there. And so the next thing that I do is add water. And I start with, it's really humid right now. So the amount of water I add depends on humidity. In the middle of the winter, which is my most desirable time to make pie because of my kitchen conditions, but it's not great because there's no fruit in season. I would add 4 tablespoons right now, and then add more if necessary. But because it is July 20 something, and it's Cleveland and it's humid and hot, I'm gonna start with 3, and it probably will end up being enough. It's really kind of amazing.
I like how you do that. I do not do it that way.
No. So this is, I have just a big ice cube. I actually used a cocktail ice cube in here because I hate when I get little chunks of ice in my crust, and then cold water from the filter from the fridge. So I can't wait to see what you do. That's so different.
Oh, it's gonna blow you away.
Oh, I can't wait. Okay. Mind blowing. And then we just do some more pulsing until the dough pulls together.
So it's funny. So while you're doing this, when do you know to stop?
So I stop when it starts to like form into like a big piece of it sort of comes together. Not the whole thing, but it starts to kind of flip over.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So it's pretty well worked together now.
She's making me nervous right now, but I've had her pie and it's delicious, so I totally trust her.
Because I did it for too long, you mean?
You do it longer than I do it.
Yeah.
But her pie's delicious. I'm not. You stick to your technique.
So
it's amazing.
It's quite wet. I don't think it's too wet. I think it's going to work just fine. But that's surprising to do 2 crusts with only 3 tablespoons of water. You won't read any recipe that suggests that, but I'm telling you, when it's humid in your kitchen and we have no air conditioning and the windows are open, then this is the situation. So I'm gonna grab a big bowl and then I'll be right back and turn the dough out into the bowl. It's right here. I don't have to go too far. Okay, so then I'm just gonna turn the dough out into the bowl here and then form 2 rounds that I'll flatten to put in the fridge for an hour. That'll become my 2 crusts. And you know, everything, again, like Emily was saying, everything you'll read is don't overwork your dough, it's gonna whatever, but this is how I do it and it works. And I would say before, when I used to use shortening in my pie crust, it was easier for me to kind of follow along those guidelines of don't overwork your dough, and this is how it sort of worked for me. I think one time I actually left it in there for a little too long, and then finally my butter crust came together, and so that's what I do. Okay, so I'm just gonna sort of bring it together a little bit.
And see, I think people underestimate how much you can work it with your hands. Like, that is more than I ever thought I was supposed to touch dough.
Right, right. And you know what? If I were working in some fancy bakery, I'm sure that there's all kinds of things that I'm doing wrong. And what I'll tell you is I cook for family and friends, and I bake for family and friends, and everybody loves my dough.
I love your dough.
Everybody loves my
love your pie.
crust. Everybody loves my pie. So that's what we do. Oops. I'm gonna wrap each of these 2 balls in plastic wrap and then flatten them a little bit and put them in the fridge. So I'm gonna take the dough, wrap it, and then kind of flatten it into a disc. And then that'll go in the fridge. And then I'll do the same thing with the second one. Ball of dough.
Done and done.
Those are my discs of dough. And then I'll put them in the fridge, and in about an hour, they'll be ready to roll out. Thank you so much for watching our video today. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Send us any questions you have in the comments below. Thanks a lot.